Welcome to Laser Focus, where I discuss all things laser cutting and engraving. In this video series, I'm working through making projects with the sample materials that came with the xTool F1 laser cutting machine. If you want a detailed rundown of all the materials that came in this kit, I did a video unpacking it all, and I'll link that below. Today, I'll be walking you through making wooden coasters using these 3mm basswood plywood sheet samples. But I really wanted to see if I could level them up so that they don't have that generic laser cut and engraved look that I see everywhere now. And these ones that I ended up making are really bright and bold, and I think that they look much more striking. I'm going to show you the process from start to finish. So if you want to join me, download the free files and keep watching. And if you watch till the end, you can get a sneak peek of my next project tutorial for making cute animal portraits from laser engraving photo paper that came in the sample kit. Okay, let's get started. The first thing I always like to do is make sure I know my cut and engraved settings. If you watched the first video in this series, you'll know that xTool provides some starting recommendations for this plywood, but I'm a big fan of always testing with any new material. So I'm going to set up a couple of really tiny tests so that we're not taking any chances. So I'm in xTool Creative Space and I'll start a new project, and I'm going to start by creating a rectangle that represents the plywood sheet. That way I can lay out the project and see where I can use some extra space to do my testing. I've already taken the measurements for the basswood sheet, so I'll go ahead and set this all up. I'm going to unlink this here. So the width is 8.268 inches and the height is 5.906 inches. I'm also going to lay out the coasters I'm making. So each coaster is 3.75 inches by 3.75 inches. It's a square, and I'm going to lay them out next to each other just like this. So this area down here is where I'll do my testing. Now I'm going to use xTool's really handy test array tool to set this up. It's a really great tool, and you don't always have to do a full out test with a whole bunch of squares. You can just do exactly what you need. So I'll walk you through setting this up. The first thing you want to do is draw your test shape. I usually do a square, but you can create any shape you want. Then with it selected, I'm going to specify here that I want to cut it. Make sure you don't forget this step. Otherwise, you're going to build out a whole beautiful array and then realize that you had it set to score the whole time and you'll have to start all over again. And when this happens, it's very sad. But obviously I've never done this. I'm just speculating. Now I'm going to check in the xTool Easy Set library and see what the recommended setting is for cutting this plywood. So we can see that their recommended settings are 100% power and 3 millimeters per second for speed, one pass. So these are the recommended settings, which is cool and is probably fine for this particular project, but I will do a little test array anyway, just to confirm and see if we can go any faster and still get a good cut. So I'll go to the applications and then I go to material test array, and I'll set this up so I'm only doing 5 columns and only 2 rows. And for power, I'll test, since the recommended setting is 100, I'm not going to go lower than that by too much. So I'll do a minimum power of 70 and leave 100 as the max. Then for speed, the recommended setting here is 3 millimeters per second. So if I go too much faster, it probably won't cut the squares out completely. And I definitely want to test their recommended settings. So we'll do one square at 3 millimeters per second and 100% power so that we're testing their recommendation. But I will also try 5 millimeters per second just to see if I can get a little bit more speed. Probably not, but we'll try it. With cutting, you can get pretty technical when you start trying to optimize for things like the least amount of charring or the fastest cut you can get if you're trying to, for example, scale and you want to get more products cut in less time. But for this beginner project, this cut is super simple and quick, and we're painting everything anyways, so we don't need to worry too much about charring. So we don't need to be too finicky with this stuff. And I'm just cleaning this up a bit and resizing it for the actual test. Okay, I'm all set up here, and I'll just start by framing to make sure I've got it cutting where I want. You probably won't be able to see this very well, but the framing is right here and I've got it as close to the edge as I can. I also put this piece here to weigh down the plywood because it's not completely flat, so there's a bit of movement here and I want it to be flat. So now it's nice and flat. So we've got the framing here, we have this weighing it down. I'm turning the framing off and going to put this down. Also, I always wear these safety glasses for some extra protection. Highly recommend it. Now back in xTool Creative Space, I'm going to go ahead and click process, and now it's showing me the cut path, and I'll just click start here. And now I'm pressing the start button on the device itself and off we go. So this first part is in real time, but now I've sped it up so that you do not have to sit here and watch the whole thing forever. Okay, and it's done. And here we have our test cut. So we'll take a closer look in a sec, but for now, let's move to the engraved test. And we're back in xTool Creative Space, and I'm going to set up the engrave test. Now, this one is a little bit more important because I actually want a pretty deep engrave for this project. And if you go to xTool's recommended engrave settings, you can see in this array that it's pretty much impossible to tell how deep the engrave actually is from this picture. So unlike the cut test, where I was pretty confident that their recommended settings would work, with this one, I can't really be confident about what settings I actually need without doing the test. I'm also going to be masking my wood before engraving it, and this is really important for the finishing process that I'll be using. So that will add another thin layer of material that the laser is going to need to engrave through. So just keep that in mind. From looking at this array though, I know that I'm probably going to land more along the bottom row than anywhere else on this array, so we can use that as a starting point. For this test array, I'm going to leave the maximum power at 100%, but I'll change the minimum to 70. And for speed, we can see that this area I'm interested in probably starts at about 100 millimeters per second. It probably won't be any faster because I'm not going to get the depth that I want with something faster. So the maximum speed I'd go with is 100 millimeters per second, and the minimum would be 35. So I'm going to take it down quite a bit to see what that looks like. And now I'm just ungrouping this and cleaning it up a bit. I like to engrave my labels rather than score them, so I'm changing the settings for the labels to engrave. Now, the other thing I like to do with engrave tests, especially when I know that my higher power settings could take things a little bit too far, is define the order I want to engrave in. So I like to group different sections together and then specify what order I want the groups to be engraved in. So I'm going to group together all the labels first. I like to get those engraved first, and I will call that layer 1. And now, since I am venturing into some pretty sketchy territory with some of these settings here, I want to order things properly so that even if the machine fails, like if I get a tiny fire and the whole thing shuts down and the engrave stops, I can still get all the other stuff engraved before that happens, and I don't have to redo my test. So these first 3 rows here are pretty safe, so I'm going to group them together and have them engraved second after the labels. I'll move them to the green layer, and I'm going to call this layer 2. Then this next row I will group together and move it to orange and call it layer 3. And then the last one, which is the sketchiest one since I don't know if it's actually going to happen, I'm going to group together and move it to red, and then that's going to be layer 4. And now I'll change the order of these layers and then also of the colors. So first we want cyan to engrave, and then green, and then orange, and then lastly we want red to engrave. And I'm taking off black and making sure that it is not outputting. And now I'm just checking to make sure that all the things that should be outputting are outputting. As the last step to preparing for the engrave, I wanted to point out that by default, the xTool will cut in whatever order it wants. Since I want it to follow my defined order that I just walked through, I'll just show you how to set that up. It's really easy. If you go to the process button here, you'll see these 3 dots, and if you click them, you get this little pop-up menu. And in this menu, you'll likely see that the default is set to auto planning, but you want to make sure that it is set to user defining. So make sure you change that. And then select one by one here and make sure that by layer is toggled on. And so what we talked about here with these layer colors, however I order the colors up here under the layer heading, that's the order it's going to follow if I click the by layer setting. So just copy the settings I have here and then go ahead and close this window, and it will respect the order that we created. So this all looks good. Now I'm just cleaning it up and tightening things up a bit, and I just want to make sure that it fits within the extra space on the piece of plywood that I'm using. So I'm just confirming that here. We are all set to go. Time to get the engrave test done. I'll start by framing just to get set up properly again. So here's the framing. Again, you can't really see this because it's not dark enough. Again, I'm weighing the plywood down with this piece here to make it flat because it's not flat. And I didn't mention the focus for the cut test because I had already set it up, but you can see it here. You can see as you bring the machine down, it takes the dots further away. So I'm going to bring this back up until it looks like 1 dot. So back in xTool Creative Space, I'm clicking process and then start. So I'm putting on my safety glasses and I'm just going to bring down this cover and we're ready to start. So I'm just pressing the start button to get things going and off it goes. Again, I'm speeding this up so we don't have to sit through this whole thing. Okay, and that's done. And now let's go ahead and take this out and we can get a closer look at both of these tests to decide on our settings. Okay, let's get a good look at these and nail down some settings. For the cut test, we can see that honestly, it would be just fine at 5 millimeters per second and some of the higher power settings. But since I'm just cutting out a couple of squares, I'll just go with the recommended settings. So 100% power and 3 millimeters per second speed. If I was doing a more time consuming cut though, I would go with the fastest cut I could get away with to save time. For the Engrave test, it's a little bit harder to see on camera, but let's see if I can get a good angle here. I'm interested mostly in the depth. The one I think is going to work the best from a depth perspective is 78% power and 35 millimeters per second speed. There's a lot of charring on this last row, but since I'm going to be masking the wood anyways, I'm just paying attention to the depth. So based on that, 78% power, 35 millimeters per second speed, that's the one I think will work the best. Here are some close-up pictures so that you can get some better angles on the depth and actually see what I'm talking about a little bit better. Okay, now onto the fun stuff. The file I'm going to be using is a set of 2 coasters I designed that are sort of a fire and ice flower theme. You can download these for free if you want to replicate this exact project. So when you unzip and open the file, you're going to find 5 different formats. And the one I recommend using is the SVG format. To open the file, I'm going into xTool Creative Space, and then I'll go ahead and click New Project. And now I'll just move this over a bit so I can open the folder and grab the file. And now I'll just drag and drop it in. You can also import it through the file menu if you prefer that way. Now for this pop-up, just say yes, scale it to fit the canvas, and now we've got these 2 coasters in here. Start by ungrouping everything, and then just go ahead and delete this. This is just here as instructions so that it's easy to tell what you should be cutting, which is the red line, and what should be engraved, which is everything in black. It's not automatically set this way in xTool Creative Space since this isn't an XCS file, so just keep in mind that we'll need to manually tell it to cut the red and engrave the black. So for now, I'll just delete this because we don't want to cut that. So the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to cut first without engraving. So I'm in the layers panel and I'm going to turn off the engraved designs. I'm turning off the outputting and I'm also going to hide them. Now we just have the 2 red squares, which are the only things getting outputted right now. We're going to cut them, so choose cut for both of these. And then to get the cut settings, I'll open the material settings library, find 3mm basswood plywood and choose that. I had decided to use their recommended cut settings, so 100% power and 3 millimeters per second speed. Now, because it's the xTool F1, I can only cut one of these at a time. So I've just deleted one since it's just the same thing we have to cut twice. And I'm just moving it up to the corner so I can use my space efficiently on the plywood sheet. And lastly, I want this to be larger. I want the dimensions of the coaster to be 3.75 times 3.75 inches. Of course, you can adjust this to whatever size you want. Just make sure you do it before you ungroup the engraved bits inside, which I didn't do. And since I didn't do that, I'll have to resize the engraved part separately when I get to the engraving stage. And now I'm going to frame the cut. Now at the laser cutter, I can use the framing to make sure there will be room on the plywood for the second one as well, and that I'm positioning things correctly. So I'm just confirming that here with the framing, which you can't see very well. And yes, there's plenty of room, so we're all good. So I've just placed it here, stopped framing, and now just bringing this down, and we're ready to go. So I'll just click Process in xTool Creative Space, and now I'll click Start, and then press Start on the machine itself, and we are off. I'll let this cut in real time for a bit so you can see the actual speed. And now I'm going to go ahead and speed it up. And we're done. Now I just want to make sure it cut through, so I'm going to do this, and yes, looks like we're good. Now you can see there's a decent amount of charring here. If you played around with the settings, you could probably reduce that, but since in this case I'm going to be painting this and doing a bunch of stuff with it, I'm not too worried about the charring. Now I'll just slide this over and frame it again, reposition it, and now I'm going to bring this down, turn off the framing, and I'll just repeat the cut. I could have told it to process again, but I did not do that, so I'll process again here, and then click Start up here in the right corner, and then make my way over to the machine and press the Start button on the machine. And now we'll just speed through this cut because you don't need to watch it again. And there we go. It's done cutting and we have 2 perfectly cut coasters. And here we are with our freshly cut coasters. Now I'm going to wipe them down with a clean rag to get some of this charring off. I'm only doing this because I'm about to paint them black, but if you're not painting, you don't really want to do this. It's going to drag the char across your wood and make a mess. I want as smooth a finish as I can get without having to sand, so wiping down should do the trick. The next step is to put a thin coat of black acrylic paint on the surface. I'm using this apple barrel stuff because I had this lying around. It's nothing fancy, and I'm just giving this a good shake. And now to keep things clean, I'm using this small container and just pouring some in, and this is the brush that I'm going to be using. And now I'm just applying a thin, even coat. I'm going to be doing 2 coats, so I'm making sure that this is as thin as possible while still getting good coverage. I didn't do the back because I'm probably going to hang these on my walls, but if you were actually using them as coasters, you are going to want at least 1 coat on the back, maybe even 2. You'll see that there are a lot of steps in this method if you're following my exact technique to get the same effect that I'm going for here, but the steps are all pretty quick and easy. There's just a lot of wait time in between, so just be patient and organized and just go through each step with the right wait times in between and you will get there. I promise. I waited 1 full hour for the coat to dry and now I'm applying another coat. After applying the second coat, I waited a full 8 hours for it to fully dry. So I basically left it to dry overnight because that just makes things easy. And now the next step is to put on the first coat of shellac. I tested a few different things before landing on this shellac. I find that I don't get any bleeding of the paint with this, which will be really important as we move forward. 1 light coat, and I'm doing this outside because it stinks and I don't have proper ventilation inside. And I like to cover it with this thing that I got from the dollar store because it's dusty and windy outside and I don't want to ruin the project. And now I wait an hour for it to fully dry. Okay, I'm back out here for a second coat. So I'll just spray another light coat, and once that's done, I'm going to cover this again. This time I'm going to wait overnight, 8 hours for it to fully dry. This is important because next we're going to mask it and we need it to be solid and fully cured. And here are our fully dried coasters, almost ready for engraving. The next step is to mask them. Now for this, I have tried using painter's tape and it works well, but it leaves streaks where the tape edges meet and you might see lines in your final result. And for that reason, instead, I use these rolls of masking, which I'll link to in the description. Now, my method here is a little bit unelegant, but it does the job. And yes, apparently I am using cuisine art scissors. If you're using kitchen scissors, probably best not to use them in the kitchen again. So I'll show you how I applied the masking with the first one here. It's important that you get full contact and not get any air bubbles. So just go slow, starting at one end and slowly putting it down. This is a lot like putting the screen protector on your phone. And this is important later because air bubbles will cause the paint to bleed in the later steps, which we want to avoid. I use the sprayer to really get it down on the wood, and then I cut off the excess with an X-Acto knife. And now the same thing with the second one. I'm just going to speed it up. First, I'm putting on the masking and then flattening it out with the brayer, and then I'm just trimming it with the knife. And now we are finally ready for engraving. All right, here we are back in xTool Creative Space. Now I've organized things a little bit better here. I have 3 canvases. The first is just the cut path for the coaster, which we've already cut. Then I have the 2 engraved designs on their own canvases, and we'll be engraving one of these at a time. Now I'm just going to connect my F1 machine, so let's give this a sec. And okay, here we go. Connected. So we have 3mm basswood plywood selected in the material settings, but I'm using my own settings anyway, so that doesn't really matter. I've got it set to engrave and it's set to output here. I've got the correct settings here that I decided on from the engrave test earlier. So that's 78% power and 35mm/second speed. And it says user defined here because I'm using my own settings, not a predefined one from the material settings library. Now I'm going to start framing so that I can get set up at the laser. Okay, so I'm going to set things up here. Let's take the lens cap off first. I've turned off one of the lights this time so that you can actually see the framing. So here it is, and the focus looks good. And now I'm going to put this down. Now over here in xTool Creative Space, I'm just going to click process. Now this engrave is going to take a while. It's about 30 minutes because we're going pretty deep with the engrave. So now I'm going to click start up here and now just pressing start on the machine and off it goes. So I'm going to speed this up because it is a long engrave, but I'll show you a section of it here in the middle in real time so that you can get a sense of the actual speed. So this is real time. And now I'm going to speed it up again. Okay, and it's done. So let's lift this up and take a quick look. This looks good with a nice deep engrave, and we'll take a closer look later, but for now, on to the next one. All right, now let's get this next one going. So same process, checking that everything is what it's supposed to be. It's on output, it's set to engrave. We've got 78% power, 35mm/second for speed. That's our engrave setting. So I'm going to go ahead and frame it so that we can get things set up at the machine. Okay, just placing this on here, and once again, I turned down the light so that you could see the framing, and I'm just centering it here, now turning off the framing, the focus looks good, and now just sliding the cover down. And now I'll start the cut in xTool Creative Space by clicking Process. So again, this one will take about 30 minutes, and I'll click Start, and now I'm going to press Start on the machine, and we're off. Now I'm just going to speed through this one because you don't need to sit through this again. Okay, and we're done. I'm just gonna take this out and get a quick look. Everything looks good here. All right, let's take a closer look at these now. So here we have our two engraved coasters. You can see there's a lot of char along here, and of course in the engraved parts as well. Here are some pictures for a better look at what I mean. But overall, these turned out really well. Remember that we've got masking on here as well, so we don't need to worry about all of the char on the non-engraved portions. Now we're going to prepare the coasters for painting. This is a super quick step where I'm just back outside and putting on a coat of shellac. I'm doing 2 light sprays across from 2 different angles to try to get more coverage on those engraved inner edges. So you can see this is the first one, and then I wait for just a few minutes, shift the angle a bit, and then do a second light spray. Since I didn't wait for it to fully dry between sprays, I do consider this to be one coat. And of course, I'm putting the cover on again, and now I'll give it 30 minutes before I start playing with paint. Okay, it is time to paint. This is my favorite part, so I'm super excited to get into it. But for this section on painting, I've distilled it down to just the key steps and left out all the details just to keep it quick. But if you do want those details, I've got a separate video where I compared this method to a different, faster one, and you can get the details on both methods there. I'll link it below. The faster method might be useful if you're a business and you want to make these in larger quantities in ways that's actually profitable. Now, the first thing I'm doing is putting down a layer of white paint. I'm using this white apple barrel paint because, again, this is what I just had lying around, but any acrylic paint that works on wood should be fine. Now I'm doing 2 coats of white paint because when we put down our colors, we really want them to pop. We want them to be bright and vibrant. So a couple of coats of white will help with that. I did quite a bit of testing to find the right technique that would give bold and bright colors, and this is ultimately what I landed on. Also, for some reason, my white paint in particular was really thin to start with, and I found this to be important. If yours is too thick, I would add some water to it to thin it out. This is really important for all of our paints because if you leave the paint thick, it will stick to the masking layer and then the paint will come right out of the engraved portions. Now you can see here that I'm using a bit of a dabbing motion, and this is because we do have a lot of charring and soot inside the engraved portions, and I don't want to drag that out because it will make the paint brown. So I'm just kind of dabbing lightly to fill in the engraved areas. I'm going to speed this up, and you can see I'm just doing the first coat here. After doing 1 coat on both coasters, I let it dry for 1 full hour. And now I'm doing the second coat the exact same way on both coasters, so I'm just going to speed this up. And once that's done, I'm giving it a full hour to dry before I start to work with the colored paints. I'm doing the fiery coaster first. For this one, I'm using 3 colors, but I have matte and shimmery versions of each. So the first layer is matte, and I started with putting down yellow in the center, and then I put orange around the yellow, and then red around the outsides. And what I'm trying to do here is blend the layers in between to sort of create a gradient effect. I'm not an artist, so I just was sort of figuring out as I went along. So then we need to wait 1 hour for it to dry. So while it's drying, I'm working on the other coaster. For the ice coaster, I only did 1 layer because the white underneath gives a really good base for the icier colors, so I don't actually need another layer of the icy colors. Now I used 4 colors and all of them were shimmery. So I'm starting here with the shimmery white, which is this one here, and you're not going to be able to see it too well, but you can kind of see the shimmery effect. Next, I did a really light blue around the white, and then I used increasingly darker blues as I got to the outer part, and again, I'm trying to blend them all together. So then I set that aside to dry for 1 hour, and I'm switching back to the fiery coaster to do the second coat of colors. And this time I'm using shimmery paints of the same colors. Now this method did take quite a long time, but again, there is a way to do this that is quicker and still gives really great results. So if you are interested in details on either of the methods, see the video in the description. So here we have both coasters all painted, and I let them dry for a full 8 hours. Okay, now this next part is quick. I'm going to remove remove the masking. This feels like unwrapping a Christmas present. It's a bit tricky to get going, but resist the urge to scrape or be rough with it because you might scratch the paint, so just be really gentle. I also don't want to risk the paint peeling off with the masking, so I'm going to go nice and slow here. Also, remember to stick around if you want to get a sneak peek of the next project that I made with the xTool F1 material samples. I'll show you that in a sec, and I will have a video coming out soon with a tutorial on that project. Okay, and we've got the masking off of this first one. We can see here that there are some areas where I need to do some touch-ups. It might not be visible on camera, but there are some areas where the white paint from our first couple of coats is a bit visible. In the next step, I'll show you how to do these quick touch-ups, but for now, let's just get the masking off of the ice coaster. So same thing with this one. I'm taking my time. I'm gonna go nice and slow here. And again, we can see here that there are some areas that need minor touch-up. I'm trying to show some of the areas where the white is visible, but I'm not sure how well you can see this coming through on camera. But overall, both of these turned out really great. So it's time to add these finishing touches. So to touch up those areas where white is showing through, I'm gonna use this tiny paintbrush and the same black acrylic paint that I was using before. And I'm just gonna carefully paint over these white areas. Any white spots or lines, I'm being really careful to stay out of the engraved areas and use a really light touch and just a tiny amount of paint at a time. And just go super slow and take your time with this. You might find you don't even need to do this step, but I wanted to do it for just that extra professional finish. And there we go. Now, just to be sure that everything is fully dry, I'm going to let it sit for 3 hours, and then we're on to our very last step. And now I'm back outside for one last coat of shellac. If you want to use these as actual coasters, it's not a bad idea to do one more coat after this, but since these are going on my wall, I'm just going to do one coat. So just a quick spray, and then I'm waiting a few minutes and changing the orientation, and then another light spray. And then my trusty cover goes on, and now I will leave this for 8 hours overnight, and then the coasters are all done. And now here they are in all their glory. I love the contrast between the colors here and how bright and vibrant they turned out. The process has a lot of steps, but most of them, as you saw, are pretty quick and easy. I also love that these really level up the usual sort of laser engraved wood coaster look that has become really common. And now, as promised, here's a quick look at the next project I did using the xTool F1 sample material pack. I used xTool's laser engraving photo paper to create these cute little fuzzy animal portraits. For a step-by-step tutorial and free files, check out the next video.